I'd be interested to know when you're talking to leaders of companies that are saying, hey, we want you to come in here and supercharge growth. Everybody wants to be on this hyper growth trajectory. And it's like, what is the emotional quotient of talking leaders through? Is your is your growth target aligned with your company's ability and specifically the sales organization's ability to withstand that trajectory? How do you coach someone through what's possible from your experience?
So one of the first principles is don't waste time in sales, from Steve Brown, right? It's like the first principle, don't waste time. And then all the coaching is around how do you not waste time? And in sales, you have to be super optimistic and you have to, all this, but it's like, you need to break things down to the fundamental building blocks of truth and then build back how you're actually going to make the number. And, there might be a number of unknowns. And in a startup, you're signing up to a number of unknowns, right? But for me, it's like, how do you continuously create this feedback loop of going back to reality, to seeing it as it is? And in that feedback loop is going to each rep, each sales manager, each sales leader, founder, investor, buyer, and find the places where the range of reality is limited for them. It could be beyond this point, they can't handle it, or it could be like, they can handle a lot, but like in this one place, it kind of dips significantly, approaches zero, goes negative. And so what I always coach is it's like, you need to really find the range of reality that's true so you can really define what problems are you trying to solve and in what order that could possibly get you here, that could, figure out something that changes the dynamics of how you sell. It might be shifting your ICP. Maybe you don't know who your ICP is, and given the current people you're selling to, you're not going to hit your number. But if you can have this feedback loop and the points where you're like, oh shit, I'm going to try to be busy, fill my calendar and keep moving with someone that's not in my ICP, instead of seeing the reality of that, spending time instead of inbounds that aren't aligned, start doing the hard work of outbounds and starting to see clearly, risk saying things that are going to blow up that deal, but get faster and better at figuring out why they're actually more aligned. And then, getting, customer success, marketing, solution engineers all aligned with that new ICP. And then all of a sudden you can do it. So what I'm saying is, I always coach in, how do you figure out where you're at? How do you figure out where there's weak spots in terms of the emotional reactions to allowing you to see clearly? And how do you just create this like feedback loop that increasingly allows you to align to the reality of your forecast? And in that process, there's unknowns how you're actually going to make it there. But they're unknown. The thing that really is damaging is when there's unknown unknowns. Because now you're completely flying in the dark. Right? And so, most companies, startups do what no one thought was possible, including some of the founders and such, and you take turns daring to dream. A lot of startups win when they shoot for the impossible. They have unreasonable demands on themselves and other people, but they create the space to see clearly and to readjust. And that's what you do. And if you're wrong, maybe then, you're a leader, you get fired, or you're a rep, you get fired, or your best reps will say, hey, we're flying in the dark. And I am a trained, fine-tuned instrument. Why would I work at a company that consistently is flying in the dark with insane targets? I either want to work at a company where there's no knowns and I can optimize my comp plan, or there's known unknowns and they have a methodology to accelerate the discovery process and to accelerate the realigning process. And that's the bigger pent-up demand. Because when things are knowns, everyone's trying to do it, right? But if you're like, no, I want to get on a rocket ship to the moon, and I want like total growth, strategically picking your known unknowns, and then being with teams that actually have a process to deal with that. That's how I deal with it. So when I come into companies, a lot of times it's like, show me your deals. I don't know if you remember this, but
Mhm.
show me all your 80% deals and that you have to win. And when we bring them through the first principles, the unit tests, right, the kind of roughly the 10 steps, each one has like exit criteria, and you can't skip steps to say you're out of steps. So you have a sponsor and you have the answer to the 3Ws, but you don't have a champion. You don't get credit for the sponsor until you get a champion, right? So they kind of stack. I don't try to convince them of the process. I'm like, let's do the process. Let's go to your most important deals that your board will be pissed off if you don't close, or it will not make you get to where you need to get to. And it's like, we do an iteration on them. And it's like, what percent do you think you got? Everyone's at 80%. And when you look at it objectively through a reality lens, why anything, why yes, why now? And then the 5 WNs, why not just do nothing? Why not, change is hard, right? Why not just stay the same? Oh, lose revenue? Well, why not just have the same amount of revenue that you have right now? Like, what happens if you don't change? How much of a change would it have to be in revenue before it'd be, you'd have to do something? Why is that? Because of this. Well, why not just, and when you do that, all of a sudden you realize that it's not at 80%. Oftentimes it's not even at 20%, which is you have answers for the organization's 3 Ws, and they're deep, wide, and high enough at the 5 WNs, which I just kind of quickly showed. But it's at 10%. And oftentimes it's like this 80% deal, it's $1 million deal, but they've gone dark. So it's not even at 10%. And it's like you hear all these excuses. And the key for me, the quality of like the founders that I want to work with, is that when they see the 80% go down to 10%, sometimes 1%, which is a suspect, you suspect they need you, but the reality is they're not coming back to you, so maybe you're wrong. That's why it's a suspect. That they actually go, oh, I didn't see it this way. I thought we were much further. And now that I see that we don't have answers, it doesn't mean there isn't a good answer, but we don't know. It's a known unknown if this is true, right? Like these were our assumptions. This was our pitch. And given that, and given like the steps for the process, they know, okay, what's the next thing I have to do to get back to a 10% where they're talking to us? And then to confirm that's 20%. And it gives them like, working harder, but like instead of doing a bunch of stuff, it's like, no, here's the specific thing that you need to do to go from 1% to 10%, 10% to 20. They find comfort. The kind of founders that I work with, right, who are willing to iterate and see things as they are, they'll then find comfort in that. And when you go through 3 deals and they all go from 80 to 10 or less, and then you tell them like, okay, well, let's look at that. Based on that, what should you do as a next step? Usually they know that I don't have to tell them, but I've held reality clearly to them and the uncomfortableness of it. And they take that next step. And then all of a sudden, either it's like, oh yeah, we aren't aligned. Now the unknowns are known and it's bad. More times than not, though, there are good ones. And then it's like that iteration was like, I believe in this. I believe that it was where you said it was. I believe that when you know where to set it as, you know where to go next. And I believe if we're not aligned, we're wasting time. Each time you do that, so that's how founders get into this work.
What's the emotional quotient of getting someone to go back? I think it's just one of those fundamental things where we don't want to think we have to go back. We want to think we've gotten as far as we are, and like I'm good at this thing now. And reminding people that it is not a loss. It's actually a gain, but it's going to feel like a loss to go from 80 to 20 or to 10.
To be a successful founder, successful leader, successful rep, my mentor says you need brains, guts, and drive, right? And when they've tried so many times their way, and now an 80% deal they've talked to the board about goes dark, there's enough greed and fear that will allow them to go back, right? They're taking the meeting with me and they agree to like look at their deals through this lens. There's enough greed and fear that allows them to go back. And then how they respond to that, do they react, or you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know our industry, you don't know this, which I think like working with your team, someone said that you don't know health tech, you don't know this, and it's like, this is a mirror. I'm showing you what you know about your deals. Whatever you say is more about you than me. It's like I'm rubber, you're glue. It's exactly like that. And it was interesting that I used to have to like emotionally not get confrontational. Like I had to learn how to hold this space and then like, hey, there's an opportunity to see things differently, maybe more clearly, and then to have clearer action about it, right? Are you open to the possibility of that? Are you open to the possibility that you're missing something? And now that I am more secure in my approach to doing this, um, it's the greed and fear that initially gets people to hit rock bottom to then change. And then when they see that and they iterate, they see their best self now. The ones that end up working with me, the ones that end up, doubling sales, having sales cycles, little plug, they're the ones that something was ignited there. And if they didn't have it before, chances are it's not going to happen, but I've seen it. Some people, it ignites. And if they trust the process, it's a painful engagement sometimes if they didn't have it before, because they got to keep coming back and relearning. But if they trust the process and they keep coming back, they will figure it out. And so that's brains, guts, and drive.